Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here today to chat at all things generative AI, especially focused within the Thought Leader Liaison role. And I hope that the takeaways that you get from this presentation are just insights and actionable ways that you can start to think about integrating generative AI within your team to hopefully make your day to day a lot less manual, tedious, and also to ultimately create more time for more impactful engagements with KOLs. So, with that, let's kick things off. And before digging into all of the fun stuff, I have to just quickly walk through this disclaimer. So, any sort of opinions expressed in this presentation or on the following slides are solely of the presenter, not of my employer. And any examples in this presentation are purely for illustrative purposes, and any trademarks are owned by their respective parties. So now that we have that out of the way, what you can expect to get out of this brief 15-minute presentation is really three key things. One, we're going to dig into what is generative AI beyond just ChatGPT. What are the basics behind this technology? Two, we're going to walk through just common generative AI use cases. And then we're going to dig into how does generative AI ultimately apply within the TLL role. So, with that, you might be wondering, who am I and why should you ultimately care about what I might have to say on this topic? So, my name is Vera. I'm the founder and CEO of Atrix. Atrix AI is a patent pending intelligence platform for life science commercial as well as medical affairs teams to make data driven decisions, but without drowning in data, leveraging a lot of the latest technology like Gen AI. I previously used to work at Uber and Facebook, launch global apps there, have published research on distributed architecture and systems, have patents applied for in AI. And over the last year, we've partnered really closely with pharma marketing, medical and regulatory experts to really think through how can we leverage Gen AI to really solve a lot of their needs. So this is where a lot of my insights today come from with regards to the TLL role. So, with that, as we've all already heard everything under the sun about generative AI, but it's definitively not a trend and it truly is here to stay. As I'm sure all of you know, ChatGPT really blew up late last year in November of 2022 and reached a million users in just 5 days. I mean, that's literally unheard of. But what's interesting is that the architecture, the technology behind generative AI, which is ChatGPT is a product of generative AI. ChatGPT is not all of generative AI, but the technology that enabled generative AI actually came from a research paper that was published in 2017 from Google Research called Attention is All You Need. And that foundationally now enabled ChatGPT and the entire generative AI field. And what I think is most exciting is that the life science industry itself is amongst the top three industries to see really the biggest impact in terms of percentage of revenues from Gen AI. And the reason why I bring this up is more to point out how important it is for us to own understanding and learning about this technology because it's here to stay. And the teams who are able to adopt Gen AI and be able to apply it in ways to make them more efficient, more personalized, are ultimately going to benefit the most. The early adopters will benefit the most from leveraging this new technology. So, this is going to be a little bit of a technical slide, but we got to really start to understand what is actually generative AI. We've all heard about ChatGPT, etc. And there's two key knowledge nuggets that I want you to take away from this that are important. And they're important to understand because in understanding them, we start to understand why this movement of AI is different and than other AI movements of the last many decades, and two, what are the specific use cases that this uniquely applies to? So, the technology that drives Gen AI and ChatGPT is typically this concept of what are known as LLMs in short. LLM stands for large language models, and large language models are in particular trained on massive corpuses of text data. And this is why today, when you go to ChatGPT, for example, you're conversing, right, with ChatGPT. It's a textual conversational based format because the inherent nature of what generative AI models are typically based on language. And that's important to know because then as you think about the applications of Gen AI, it's all to do with language, right? And text and conversation. A more recent development that's been happening in the Valley this year and likely will start to pick up steam next year is this concept of LMMs, which stands for large multimodal models. And what these do is they go beyond just text and they're able to interpret, call it images or videos. So imagine if you're reading a clinical paper and there's a graph or there's some sort of visual. So LMMs are inherently kind of trained to be able to understand visual components as well as language. So that's really exciting because that can unlock a whole new spectrum of opportunities. The second key point that I want you to take away from all of this is a somewhat common or misunderstood, or perhaps a misconception, oftentimes when it comes to even the term generative AI, is that a lot of folks think that ChatGPT or generative AI in general is just used to, well, generate content, generate summaries, generate images, etc. When you actually look at the technology, there is, and I'm simplifying this, but there's roughly two buckets that models will fall into. There's encoder models and decoder models. And it's fairly straightforward in that decoder models, they decode, so they generate. So likely, and I this is speculative because I don't know all of the inner workings of older models of ChatGPT, but the older models were likely decoder models because they generated. There's another bucket of models in generative AI called encoder models. And encoder models encode like their name, and they're really used for analyzing. So imagine scanning through a clinical study and picking out the generic names or picking out adverse events, right? An encoder model would be really good at analyzing. And generative AI in general can be really applied in either of those two ways. And oftentimes people only think of the generative component and they don't think about all of these other ways that this new technology can really be applied. So those are, thank you for bearing with me. I know that was probably a bit dry and technical, but it's important to understand. So with that, I think another important context to cover in order to understand and apply this technology is ultimately to understand why is this AI shift different than all of the previous AI shifts. I mean, AI in general has been around for many decades, right? It's in it of itself, it is nothing new. So let's zoom in a little bit on life sciences and look at kind of the evolution of what enabled this new wave and why it's different. So when we think not even too long ago, the first kind of wave of technology in life sciences, or wave one, really came from digitization. So this is taking your pen and paper, right, written notes and putting it on a Word document and digitizing it. I mean, if you think about it, the FDA just 8 years ago allowed for electronic submissions. That's not that long ago that the FDA, in a way, experienced some form of wave one. And then once this wave one was established, right, and things were able to be digitized, we now moved into wave two, which is kind of what I would classify as basic machine learning. If you are familiar with neural networks, call it V1. And this is very much simplifying it. But the way to think about this wave two of almost smart automation that came on top of the digitization of a lot of processes is that these models are really good at learning on discrete units. So let's say you're building a house and you're laying it brick by brick by brick. And this is overly simplifying it, but these wave two models, they would look at a brick, they would look at the next brick, they would look at the next brick, and then they would likely be able to predict the brick after that. So it was very much based on these kind of singular ways of learning, very predictive, off the known, and very discrete. With wave three, the reason why it's different is that generative AI is able to, rather than looking at kind of silo discrete units, it's able to recognize patterns and contexts, and it's able to also create patterns and contexts. And because it's able to generate new patterns and contexts, it's also able to learn from those and therefore almost get smarter. So it becomes a reinforcement loop. So if we go back to this brick example, imagine if I'm building a house and I have rainbow colored bricks, blue, green, red, and then I decide to lay out the bricks in circles. So generative AI, in simple terms, can look at the whole patterns and the whole context of it being a circle or all of the different colors and predict what the next pattern might ultimately look like. So it starts to kind of elevate its ability to understand more in a much more contextual way. I'm going to illustrate this with one simple example of a house plant we all probably already know because it's blown up on Instagram, the Monstera plant. So we're going to walk through what each of these waves looks like in the context of search. So imagine if I'm about to buy a house plant and I'm Amazon and I want to enable great search for the Monstera plant. Well, wave one, right, of that is taking the photo of the plant and making it kind of digital. Pretty straightforward. In wave two, when we think about search, it was almost keyword based search. So I know, for example, that this Monstera plant can also be defined as a Swiss cheese plant, Monstera deliciosa, a plant with perforated leaves. And then I could train a model to generally learn and associate that these are related to each other. And maybe I could also do spell checks, right? Or when you query on Amazon, sometimes you see the recommendations if you misspell a word, right? So that's almost a simplified demonstration of wave two. And wave three, the way to think about generative AI is because if you remember, it's a large language model. So it's trained to understand language and context. Generative AI itself has a much easier time, so to speak, in understanding descriptive ways to talk about a specific thing. So in this case, with the Monstera plant, you could also describe the Monstera plant as a plant with big perforated leaves, or a beginner plant with heart-shaped leaves, or a vining plant with large green holy leaves, whatever you might want to call it. Generative AI is able to more easily and dynamically put that together that you're referring to the Monstera plant. And the power of it really comes in the fact that generative AI can generate various other descriptions of the plant. It could say that this plant is a vining plant with heart-shaped leaves. It could say that it's a cat-friendly plant. So imagine if it generates 100 different ways that you could describe the Monstera plant. Now all of those ways become ways that you can search on Amazon for the Monstera plant, and it'll know that it's the Monstera plant. So hopefully, I know this is somewhat a simplified kind of tangential example, but hopefully this really demonstrates what are the nuances and the differences, so that way we can start to think about what the actual applications are. So with that, the actual applications of generative AI today, broadly speaking, can fall into one of three buckets. One is to do with creation or generation, right? Two is to do with analysis. If you remember the encoder models, they're really great at looking at stuff and analyzing. Sentiment is one example. And then the third bucket is because they're good at analyzing, they can also assist in compliance and review, which is an important element of all parts of life sciences. So with that, in the first bucket of create, of course, Gen AI can be used for content authoring. So think about it as generating drafts of content. You could personalize it across audiences, across therapeutic areas or categories. Again, Gen AI content, it's good for first draft. It's almost like your assistant and co-pilot in that. It shouldn't replace full high quality writing, but it will certainly get you to a high quality piece and ideation much faster. The second application is that Gen AI is really great at summarization, transforming pieces of content, and also translating them. So imagine you can now translate English to Spanish, or you could analyze Spanish and return English analysis of Spanish, right? So this really assists with global to local team communication or cross country team communication. It's also really great at transforming content. Let's say I start with a LinkedIn post, but now I want to transform this LinkedIn post into a social media post or into an email, or maybe I have notes that I took from my KOL meeting that I now want to transform into an email based off of those notes, right? Gen AI is a good application of that. In the second bucket with extract and analyze, as if you remember with the encoder, Gen AI can really be applied to a lot of document review and analysis. So whether you want to review lots of literature, scientific literature, whether you want to review Congress abstracts, whether you want to pull out certain criteria, like I want to scan these studies and pull out all the adverse events, right? It's really great at doing that. And as we saw with the Monstera plant example, it's also really great at search and traceability. So, for example, finding a piece of content within your CRM where you might not know the exact keyword, but you know how to describe that piece of content, right? Give me the deck on the safety of a drug called Parallax, right? And it's a lot easier for Gen AI to be able to find it for you versus in Wave 2 world. And then lastly, with compliance and review, Gen AI can also be used to analyze documents against rule sets, so compliance guidelines, and it's also a great tool to use for content validation. So, for example, cross-checking that the numbers in your presentation match with the a scientific study, right? Or match with another promotional piece of material that you might have, et cetera. So with that, specifically within the TLL function, there's a couple of ways that we can really translate that into case-specific applications. So one, on the KOL engagement front, it can assist with pre-call planning and much more easily synthesizing reports. So with pre-call planning, imagine if you were able to, for example, take and synthesize all of your previous interactions with the HCP, and the Gen AI model can effectively read through it and give you a synthesis of all the past interactions you've had with that HCP, effectively giving you a brief before you go into your meeting. So that way you're all ready and you've now reduced your pre-call planning time, from call it 1 hour to 20 minutes because you've been able to synthesize and go through like analysis paralysis, so to speak, of all of your internal notes to be prepared for this meeting. On the flip side, after your KOL engagement, you can leverage Gen AI to more easily extract insights from your field notes. Let's say you're leaving a meeting with Dr. Alex, you're in your car, you pick up your phone, you're like, I'm going to leave a voice note of 4 minutes of my entire interaction. What if that voice note could get automatically sent, to your internal SharePoint, get transcribed, and then Gen AI can go through that and kind of extract, well, what are the key insights? Are there action items? So that way, by the time you get to the airport, you pull out your laptop and you have all of your meeting notes effectively synthesized there, so you can more easily create notes to put into your CRM, right? Or to create your notes on Friday to submit to your manager, as an example. On the Congress planning side, what Gen AI can really be used for is analyzing abstracts. So, say you pull a PDF of all the abstracts, so you have effectively some sort of script that can go through, pull all the presentations. You can have Gen AI effectively scan through that, synthesize different insights from it. And let's say you have a specific focus that you care about with the Congress that you're going to, you can more easily find the abstracts that might be more useful for you. Or maybe you want to scan through which of your KOLs are presenting certain abstracts, right? You can do that so much more easily. The other great application with Gen AI is because it's able to understand language in an unstructured way. It's really a great application for sentiment and social monitoring. So imagine, for your Congress, you set a 5-day monitoring period. You have all of these tweets come in. You're not going to have the time to sift through 1,000 tweets. So let Gen AI do that and synthesize all of the themes and insights, that have come out from that analysis. And then if you wanted to, you could dig in further and look at the tweets, right? But it's really great at helping you sift signal through the noise. On the KOL identification side, Gen AI could also be a really great tool for identifying new DLLs. So, for example, if we go back to our social monitoring, let's say, we did our social monitoring synthesis and we noticed that there's a DLL that has influence, call it on Twitter, that is not in your CRM. So MSL, your team, or sorry, your TLLs are not interacting with them directly throughout the year, but the COL is discussing something really critical about your drug or your product. Well, maybe it's worth it to now start engaging with them. The other application for KOLs is that you can really leverage generative AI to be this natural language uh, conversational layer between you and KOL data. So can I'm sure you all might have internal KOL data sets that you pull from, and then there's the external data like social, publications, open payments, all of that. Synthesizing that into one place and being able to more so ask natural language questions. Which KOLs have taught, have done studies that have had these adverse events with this generic drug name, right? And what if it could actually pull that up for you? So it's a good mechanism to kind of explore. And then the last two buckets, and this presentation will come to an end, are really around social listening, which we kind of touched on. So whether that is looking at Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, depending on what you're focused on and your kind of compliance requirements, really great tool to analyze different sentiments, discover new DOLs. It could also be used to create a social brief for your KOL, similar to the pre-call planning. So imagine if you were preparing for your call with your KOL, you have your internal notes you've synthesized. What if you were able to go to Twitter or see if they were in any congresses, automatically pull that, synthesize it, and get a brief like, oh, this KOL talked about safety and safety concerns with a contraindication with drug XYZ. Oh, that's good to know going into my conversation with this KOL, because maybe that's a topic we should discuss. And then lastly, generative AI can really help with gathering and synthesizing field insights. So we talked about that kind of voice to transcription. Gen AI can be used to kind of scan notes and help synthesize insights. So imagine again, you send a voice note, or maybe you take a photo of your notebook, right? It gets transcribed. Gen AI is able to be like, okay, these are the key insights we think. Take a look at this. Does this look right to you? And then you're like, yeah, okay, cool. And then you can just copy over what you want to your CRM, right? And just automatically sync it. So it can help with synthesizing insights, as well as helping create field reports in a lot easier way, right? So if you have those insights, AEs or whatever else, now can you create a first draft of your weekly report that you might have to send to your manager, or a Congress Insights report, right? So anyway, hopefully there's a lot of different applications here. So hopefully this was helpful in just getting the creativity and the juices flowing around how Gen AI can be applied in the TLL function. And a very common question I get around this topic is, will AI take our jobs? And there's two things I have to say, and one statistic that is not included in here, but AI will not take your job. People who adapt and use AI will take your job. But, you know, there recently was a study that was published looking at salaries and skill sets. And if you had an AI skill set, your salary could be, I think it was as much higher as up to 40%. So AI, in my personal opinion, is going to create more jobs. The jobs might look different, and your skill sets, just like any skill set, will need to adapt. I mean, it's, back in the day, instead of a calculator, we used to use an abacus, right? So, I mean, the calculator made things a lot easier, and now we use them every day and we don't even think about them. So I think in a lot of ways, generative AI is really there to assist and help you. And the sooner that you're able to learn and leverage it to empower yourself and the team, the the better it'll be, and the more value will be created for yourself, your skill sets, your career, as well as the team that you're ultimately on. So with that, I hope that you found this helpful. Please don't hesitate to ultimately email me, text me at my work number if there's any sort of questions. Thank you so much.